All right, here we go with episode 92 of Return to Authenticity, and this week's guest, Wes Woodhouse. This was a fun conversation, and for anyone out there who fantasized about being a fighter pilot, as I did, having an opportunity to have a conversation with a real live active fighter pilot flying F-15s with over 400 combat hours was really, I was like a kid on Christmas morning. I just was almost giddy. And what came out for me was this idea of having seen a lot of movies about fighter pilots, that movies and the reality are just not the same thing. Movies are always tend to be super like on the edge, radical, crazy guys. And what you see, what I've met and having met Wes in this conversation, but certainly in others in my life, is that fighter pilots are super methodical. It's all about managing what is a unbelievably unmanageable and chaotic world. And so they are by the book. And so Wes shares some great stories about being a fighter pilot, and it just came across as this really genuine, humble guy who is clearly on the leading edge of a man with a skill set that is very, very unique. And now he really focuses on, or he's working to focus on, how to help people be more intentional with their attention in a very distracted world that we live in. He shares some concepts and ideas around how to get deep focus and attention, something that's required in the cockpit, and how he's looking to share that now with others. And so super needed, great conversation, really interesting. And I think you're going to love having a chance to sit down and meet this week's guest, episode 92, Wes Woodhouse. Welcome to the Return to Authenticity podcast, where we hear inspiring and courageous stories of people who made bold pivots in their lives toward their more authentic selves, that version of themselves they were born to be, or they had to find after life threw them a major curveball. I'm your host, Eric Sardina. Welcome and stand by. Welcome to the show, everyone. Today's guest is Wes Woodhouse. Wes is an active duty fighter pilot, flying the F-15E Strike Eagle with over 400 combat hours, and is currently flying in an operational test squadron. He has had to develop extreme skills in attention and focusing on the task at hand during the stresses of combat operations, flying fighters to engage enemy forces and protect American and coalition troops working to secure foreign nations against terrorism. Wes understands the critical need to be intentional about where you place your attention and the need to be around other intentional people who can mutually support you in goal attainment. Wes is working to apply the lessons and skills learned in the cockpit to raise up the next generation of leaders so they can own their attention in the midst of an onslaught of powerful distractions. I'm excited to have Wes on the show today to share his lessons learned at the edge of the fighter pilot envelope and how those lessons can assist us all in our day-to-day battle to remain focused on what's important. And with that, Wes Woodhouse, welcome to the show.
Eric, thank you very much for having me on. I'm excited.
It's an honor, truly an honor and a privilege to have you on the show, my friend. So appreciate your service to this nation, doing the things that you've done. And I'm excited because maybe like a lot of people that are listening, I'm a kind of a fighter pilot fanboy, I guess you'd say, right? So a real nerd when it comes to it. So I'm really honored to have you here, and we'll dig into the whole world of being a fighter pilot, what it took to get there, and all those things, because I can really geek out on that stuff, and I think probably a lot of my audience will as well. So.
Absolutely. I can geek out on that stuff too. So this can be good.
Right on. So let's talk about childhood and growing up and what your influences were as you were a kiddo and all that. Where did you start out?
I started out born and raised in the Chicago suburbs. Excuse me. Grew up. My biggest influences were my parents. I was the oldest of 6 kids.
Oh wow!
So had a lot going on at home growing up, but that was great. We loved it. Had plenty of activities to do, even if it was just going in the backyard and hanging out and playing. But where we lived was right under the final approach path for Chicago O'Hare. So all growing up, my brothers and I in the backyard, playing baseball, whatever it is, every 30 seconds or so, there's an airliner going right over our backyard. Wow. And, just a couple thousand feet. So I spent my entire childhood always looking up in the sky and seeing those jets flying over and everything. And that was
Amazing.
probably, I mean, definitely the first thing that kind of piqued my interest into aviation. And it wasn't until later on that I put the military and aviation together and determined, yeah, I think I want to pursue being a pilot in the Air Force and doing that whole thing. So those were the big things. And at that point, it was just figuring out how to do it and working hard to get there.
Right on. So, you 6 siblings, you're the oldest. So immediately I think about first kiddos, right? And the dynamics there, especially when you've got a bunch of younger siblings, you were the one figuring it out really for everybody else first, right? As the firstborn. Yep. What was the mix between boys and girls and ages and stuff like that? How closely are you guys bunched together?
All of us. So my youngest sister is adopted, so she's a fair bit younger than my youngest biological sister, but it was myself, and then I had 2 brothers, each spaced about 2 years, followed by 2 sisters, again spaced about 2 years. And then my youngest adopted sister is a good bit younger than my youngest sister. But so growing up, the 5 of us were fairly tight in age, especially my brothers, and so a lot of, and to your point, being the oldest and going to figure it out and whatnot, that is definitely true. But it was good, and I think I'm not sure if my personality was suited for that or if that kind of drove my personality. But one of the two, maybe a combination.
Right. Were you pretty competitive with your brothers? I mean, 3 boys together, close in age.
Still very competitive to this day, which is awesome.
Yeah. Did you have a close sibling rivalry stuff, or was there? I mean, sometimes you can see it seems to play out one of the 2 ways, right? Either we were always knocking heads, or we were always there for each other, or maybe both. I mean,
there were times where we'd knock heads, but I would say largely it was a much more healthy level of competition. Let's get outside in the backyard and play baseball, or basketball in the basement, or whatever else it is. We like a good competition, and even to this day, one of the big areas for competition right now is disc golf. We started playing disc golf during the COVID years, and have kept up. And we don't live close anymore, unfortunately, but we do get together periodically, and even when we're not, I go disc golfing the other day, and I'll send my scores to my brothers in their chat or whatever, and we'll rib each other as far as like if you had a bad day out there or whatever, and then we get together and anything from playing pool or ping pong to anything we can come up with. It's always a good healthy competition. So
very cool,
a lot of fun.
Very cool. You growing up in Chicago, so you grew up in the snow and the cold climate, that type of thing. Did you have favorite teams? I think of Chicago Bears football. Were you a football guy, basketball, Jordan era? What was your kind of sports stuff growing up?
We followed baseball. Yes, the Chicago Cubs. Is who we followed, and it was kind of cool growing up in the era of Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire and Barry Bonds and the race to the most home runs in a season. So we were pretty into that. We did get to go to a couple games as well throughout our childhood. So, getting to see the professional players and, collecting all the baseball cards and stuff like that. But baseball was, and we all played baseball. So it was kind of the natural thing to follow the Cubs closely. We'd watch other sports as well. But it was primarily baseball that we followed.
Right on. And the Cubs won the World Series not that long ago, right? Didn't they first?
They did, 2016. No, 2016.
16.
Yes.
Okay. Which was the first time in ever or 100 years or something?
It had been a very long time. Yes.
that had to be cool to see.
That was a lot of fun.
So I also think about baseball. So when I think about fighter pilots, eye-hand coordination, right? The ability to see things, make quick decisions. Yeah. And I would think that those things, the baseball probably helped you with regard to attention at a very high rate of speed, small margin for error.
I would think so too. And I always played catcher, and as the catcher, you've got the pulse on the field in the game, and you're helping to call some of the strategic shots when the team is playing defense anyway. And so I think so too. Being able to see things out the periphery as the guy on first trying to steal second base during this pitch, catch the ball, and then throw it down to second base, and definitely hitting hand-eye coordination. That definitely comes in handy when you're going out there trying to fly airplanes, and you're actively flying a jet while you're trying to take in as much information on the situation as possible, and keeping track of where your wingman is and where any potential threats are, and maneuvering your own jet and your formation, and maybe even more than your formation, the multiple different formations of fighters and potentially other players that are out there as well. Lots of moving parts. And so, yeah, I would say I don't think I've ever quite thought about how baseball maybe tied directly into training and success as a pilot. But I think you're probably onto something. I think there's a definite correlation.
And you think about hitting a ball too. I mean, I've read some books. I'm trying to think of the name of some of the books I've read that were written by baseball players that sort of applied it to business and the ability to make split second decisions and tough decisions. Right. And the idea of like, and I can't remember the numbers, but from the time a ball leaves a pitcher's hand and is actually picked up by your eye to the moment it passes by you is something so small.
It is.
And especially when you talk about more advanced baseball and you got people throwing breaking pitches and things, that being able to pick up what pitch it is and how am I going to swing, all those things, super high rate of acuity, right? Has to happen.
And I was never even close to that level. I played up. I didn't even play high school baseball. I started focusing on studies a lot more, trying to get into a commissioning program and everything for my future. But
right.
Yeah, there is a lot that goes into that, and a lot of those skills are transferable to flying airplanes.
Right.
That's definitely true.
Yeah. I remember. So as a kid, I was, I think we talked before this time we talked earlier. I was a nerd about fighter pilots. I had all the books. I had model airplanes I would build, all these different things. And I remember talking to a commercial airline pilot who was a friend of our family who flew for American. And I told him I was interested in flying, and he was like, "Oh, that's great. You should really keep." I was probably at the time maybe 15. Yeah, you should really pursue that. And he asked me, "Are you playing any sports?" And I was a tennis player growing up, and so he's like, "Oh, tennis is great because it's super great for eye-hand coordination and speed, and you really want to have that." And I was like, "Man, I didn't even think about that type of thing." But of course, I never pursued. I pursued it with one letter I sent to American Airlines saying, "Hey, I'm interested in your your pilot training program," and they didn't have one. So they sent me one back going, "That's a nice idea. We don't have one. So, get your license, start earning hours, and then call us back." And I was like, man, that's the end of that. So, and I always had this fear that I would join the military to be a pilot, and then I would end up not making it. And end up being, in our family, it was always like, well, if you're not going to do the thing you want to do, you'll be in the kitchen, or you'll be like an MP. It was always some worst case scenario, right? So instead of being like, well, maybe instead of a pilot, you would work on the planes. That'd be kind of cool, maybe, or something. It was always like, no, if you're not going to be a pilot, you're going to fail out and you'll be in the kitchen somewhere. And I thought, man, I just don't want to take that risk. And I gave up on a dream before I gave up on it myself. Like, I self-defeated the dream before letting the dream just break on its own, right? I mean, at least give it a shot, right? Type of thing when I think about those days now at the same time. So let's talk about how you go from being a kid underneath the flight path of O'Hare to thinking maybe I could actually fly a plane. Did it ever, and sorry, I'm bouncing around a little bit, but the idea for me of seeing an airplane in the air and thinking, I don't understand how that thing is there, like how it can actually be there. And then how is a human actually making it stay up there was always sort of, mind boggling to me. But what were your thoughts as you start to go down that path of maybe I'm going to do that, and how do I actually do it?
I don't think I ever really overanalyzed it and thought about it that way. I was just like, I'm going to be a pilot. And so just kind of figured out what I needed to do in order to get to that point and put my head down and did it. It's funny. Before wanting to be a pilot, I wanted to be an engineer and start an engineering firm or something like that. And so my mind kind of worked in a figure out how things work type of way. And so I think once I started being interested in aviation, I had dove in, and, my parents probably helped me find some books or education on how airplanes work and that. And so, just slowly started building a basic understanding of that. And growing up, we flew on airliners to different places periodically. And then in high school, I joined Civil Air Patrol and got to do a little bit of flying with them. I actually got to the point where I soloed a Cessna 172, which was very cool.
Nice.
Especially as a, high schooler. I was 16.
Wow.
Probably not even 17 years old when I got to solo. So that was, just barely starting to drive cars legally by myself. So that was very cool. And in a lot of ways, it was kind of a reinforcement that, this is something that I definitely want to continue to pursue. And I'm going to figure out how to get there and put my head down and get there. And so, asking people, Civil Air Patrol is a great resource because a lot of those guys were were either prior military pilots or had a lot of aviation experience and wanted to help, pour into the lives of high schoolers and middle schoolers like myself who are interested in just the military, but then specifically aviation. So figuring out, what do I need to do? And the overwhelming thing was you need to get good grades, because good grades are by far the majority of the metric that pilot candidates are measured against. And even just getting into a commissioning program, let alone with a scholarship at a 4-year university, whether it's one of the military academies or like the route that I went, which is a civilian university and then an ROTC program in conjunction with that. And so throughout high school, what do I need to do? I need to get really good grades, and a technical degree is better. The Air Force at the time and still looks on technical degrees at a higher level than non-technical degrees, especially if you're pursuing something like going into aviation, which makes sense.
Yep.
So, which married up well with my desire to become an engineer. So, but really good grades throughout high school, that was the key. And so that's kind of what I put my head down. Extracurriculars and sports were good to have as well, but not at the expense of grades. And so while I did do a lot of leadership extracurriculars like student council and things like that, the primary focus was on making sure that my technical skills, my technical subjects, maths and sciences, were on point so that I'd be marketable to a 4-year university as well as a commissioning program.
Yeah.
And then same thing, getting into college and the commissioning program, the major thing for being competitive to get into pilot training is grades. Over 60% of the metric is simply grades. And then a bunch of it is leadership and, performance in the ROTC program. But so that was a big focus throughout college as well. I had friends who would play video games and, go out and party or whatever. And I had to not do some of those things so that I could make sure I was getting the grades that I needed in order to be competitive. And, the Lord was gracious and got me through college and got my pilot slot after there. And then, it's the same thing. You get to pilot training, and what's the big thing? You got to be studying and in the books. And so it's a reason that there's an emphasis on grades, because becoming a pilot requires being able to study and to know your systems. The example that I like to give is when you're flying an airplane and something goes wrong with the airplane systems wise, like there's a systems issue, whether it's hydraulic or electrical or with the engines, you can't just pull over onto a cloud. Like you can just pull over your car on the side of the road, stop, get out and, figure out what you're going to do. You're physically moving through the air. And if you stop, you're going to crash.
Right.
So if you don't know the numbers and you don't know the systems by heart, usually you will have time to pull out the checklist and figure that out. But a lot of times there's immediate actions you have to take in order to keep the jet flying and to keep yourself and anybody who's flying with you safe. So yeah, studying was a huge part of it. And I'm very glad. I think my parents played a role in this as well, that early on I realized the importance of studying and making sure that I was doing the things that would give me the grades that I needed. And not only that, but learning the information that I needed in order to succeed. But I'm glad that I figured that out early on and pursued that, because without that, there's no chance I would have made it to where I am now.
Really good. Yeah. So did you know Air Force was going to be the one, or did you think I'll fly for the Marines or I'll fly for the Navy or anything at all? Was that ever a decision, or how did you settle on Air Force?
It was, I believe, 8th grade that my family went on a vacation out to Colorado, and we stopped by the Air Force Academy and visited the grounds there. And that was the point that I made the connection between aviation and the military, and the fact that the military would be a great way to get pilot training and get a lot of hours, and obviously, fly a fighter jet.
Yeah.
After that point, I was pretty much focused completely on the Air Force. And I believe I applied to the Naval Academy as well, just as a kind of backup.
Yeah.
But the Air Force was always my primary.
Yeah.
So I really never wavered from that.
Gotcha. Okay. So you go to civilian college. Where'd you end up going to school?
I went to Michigan Technological University up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Beautiful country. You talked about snow.
Oh,
there, you got a lot of snow up there.
Upper Peninsula.
It is gorgeous.
Oh man, you loved it, huh? Yeah. So you definitely, right on. Very cool. Did you have any challenges when you were in college? Like, did you ever think, man, this class is above my head, I'm struggling, or were you able to kind of, handle the rigor of the coursework?
For the most part, the coursework, as long as I was putting in the time
Yeah.
and effort that I needed to, I also was able to find other students who were also pretty committed to putting the work in and doing the studying that they needed in order to do well in the class. So we would, get together and study, which was great for accountability, because if you're meeting up with somebody else, they're going to help you because they'll understand concepts that you don't, and you can help them understand concepts that you've mastered that they need a little help on, which in turn will help you solidify all those concepts.
Right.
But then also the accountability of just being in the habit of getting in the books and taking the time that I needed to study. So the coursework itself, I would say it was doable as long as it's putting in the time. I think the big thing to learn was the time management of being okay with letting things that would be fun to do and even beneficial to do go in preference to the things that I needed to get done, whether it was studying or whether it was working on my extracurriculars like the ROTC and going a little bit above the standard to make myself even more competitive or to build those leadership skills that I needed that the cadre there at the unit wanted to see in order to give me a good recommendation for pilot training. So the time management and the ability to say no to friends who are going off to do, whatever it is or whatnot, and to put in the time where I needed to put it in and the attention where I needed to spend the attention.
Yeah, that's really good. It's insightful. I think often we like to practice the things we're good at because we get great results. It's harder to practice the things that we're bad at because it's more of a struggle. It's
fun.
Yeah, and it's fun, right? Absolutely. Yeah. Whether it's, lifting weights or running or doing whatever your whatever it is, if you're like, man, I want to do that more because I get great results and I feel good when I do it and it's fun, versus that aspect of my training or my work that it's a grinder and it's going to be hard. And so where do I spend my time? And it's easy to kind of, I think, lie to yourself a little bit and say, well, this is still helping me. It's still good. It's still in the realm of things I need to do. But you end up avoiding the things that are maybe the things you really need to be spending time on to get better at, right? It's hard to be bad at something. And we have to commit to be bad at something before we can be good at something, right? But doing the things we're less than great at can be hard emotionally to do, right?
Yeah, right. And you said the justification about, this is beneficial. I think that is probably one of the harder parts because there's a lot of things that are beneficial, but a lot of them are the small rocks that are not going to surmount to probably the goal that you want if you have a goal. And I mean, getting into pilot training and becoming a fighter pilot is a pretty big goal. You can't just get that in one fell swoop. It takes a lot of putting things in place and focusing on the wrong things, even though they could have been beneficial, were probably not the most beneficial in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Right
Absolutely
on.
True.
Okay. So you finish school. So the way the ROTC works, so you get through all your 4 years and then you start your the commissioning program. So then you get your commission after your graduation?
It all happens at the same time. Yeah. So I go through, it's essentially they layer the ROTC program on top of your regular coursework. So there's an event for a couple hours every week that is mandatory for all the cadets to get together and do different forms of training. And then you actually have a class 3 days a week, your Air Force class, two or 3 days a week, depending. And it counts as a couple credit hours towards your degree. So some of them you can use as electives for your degree. Others are just hours that you have to go attend in order to graduate and commission. But you attend those and you're graded. And that's where you learn how the structure of the Air Force works. And that is where they build you into the Air Force officer that they are building you into. Part of it is physical training as well. So a couple mornings a week, we had to get up super early, well before classes are going to start. So you can go get your workout with the rest of the unit and then go back, shower and off to your classes. But then when you graduate, it's a simultaneous graduation and commission as an officer into the Air Force. And then at that point, you're done with your school and you've been commissioned as an officer in the military, in this case, as a second lieutenant in the Air Force. And then shortly after that, you'll have your initial assignment and you'll go off and move to wherever your initial assignment was, which for those who got selected for pilot training, they would go off to pilot training. And for the other ones who select some other career, whether it's as an engineer or in logistics or in anything else, they'll go off to their training for that and then move on to their first assignment after that.
So, is there a basic training or a boot camp after the 4 years, or no? Or you've already kind of done that during the 4 years?
There is a form of a boot camp, and it happens between your second and third year of college. So right after your sophomore year, you'll go, and it's called field training. You spend 4 to 6 weeks down in Alabama, and that's your kind of in garrison basic training, if you will, where you kind of go through a lot of the standard military training, making your bed and all that type of stuff. So
all that fun stuff.
But a lot of those same activities are happening throughout your college as you are a cadet and as you're doing the activities, because a lot of them are geared up towards the freshmen and the sophomores. They're training in order to go to field training so they can perform at field training. And then after you get back from that, then you start to take more of a leadership role in the ROTC detachment, and you're making decisions, and you're developing some of the activities and running the activities that and trainings that the cadets are all doing on the couple hour block once a week type of thing. Or for example, one of my jobs at one point I was in charge of doing all of the PT program, the physical training program. So I'm the one who came up with all the workouts that we were going to do. And then when we all got up there, I was the one who was, pointing everybody in the right direction and explaining what we were doing and trying to make it so that everybody would pass their physical fitness test, because there's a semi-annual physical fitness test that we have to take as well. So start to take the leadership your second couple of years.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So now you go up to your advanced training, which is going to be pilot training and learning to be a pilot. And so you're in a group. How big is that group? What's that look like?
My pilot training class, there's 4 different bases that do pilot training, and each of those bases start a new pilot training class every 3 weeks. And my class was 24 students.
Okay.
Some of them were international. We had a couple of guys who came in from a couple other partnered nations with the United States, and they did their whole entire training program with us. But so there was 3 of them. So about 21 or so United States Air Force pilot candidates, if you will, students at pilot training. Okay.
And then of the 21, then how many end up getting jet or I guess they're maybe all jets now, but you got helos, you have different types of aircraft, and you have fighter jets. How many, what was kind of the breakdown of your class? Do you remember?
Yep. One guy went to go fly helicopters. 2 of us got a fighter jet. 1 guy got a bomber. 2 of the guys, there's a program where instead of going to fly an operational jet, you actually go through instructor training, and then you stay at pilot training and are an instructor for your first assignment. So I think 2 guys went and did that. And then everybody else was some form of a tanker or a cargo or one of the other types of air mobility jets.
I got you. Okay.
Yeah. So out of the 21 of us, 2 of us got and I think one of the guys who stayed as a pilot training instructor is now flying in a fighter as well. So 3 out of the 21 of us or so.
Okay. So 10% or so. And is it the top? Yep. I mean, is the hierarchy sort of fighter pilot is the 2 best in the class, or how did that work?
So yeah, kind of. As with pretty much everything in the Air Force, it's in large part a meritocracy, at least for assignments out of a formal training program like pilot training. Every student towards the end of graduation gets to pick what airplane they would want to fly. And then whoever's the top of the class will probably get hopefully their top 1 or 2 picks.
Yeah.
And then as it kind of trickles down, then whatever's left is kind of going to whoever's in the bottom half or so of the course. There's also during pilot training at the halfway point, the class splits into the jet trainer, which goes to fighters or bombers, and then the I can't remember what it's called, but it's a business jet that you go fly. So you're training for your refuelers and cargo and everything else like that. And then actually there's a third one. It's for helicopters. You go to helicopter training for the last half of pilot training.
Right on.
So yeah, very, very competitive, and it's based a lot, and it's based on what's available. just because you want a certain jet doesn't necessarily mean there's a slot open for your pilot training class.
Right.
So nobody may get that one.
Right. Okay. And so, did you have any moments? So obviously you've done all the schooling, you're working on getting good grades, you're coming up through all this stuff. You had your exposure to flying when you were a teenager, and now you're getting more in these advanced levels. Did you ever hit that moment where it was like either I'm airsick or I'm something like that? You reached some sort of like roadblock or stumbling block around this idea of the actual flying?
Absolutely. And you could ask my wife, but it was probably every other day. I would come home just top of the world, feeling like I've got this, under wrap and everything is awesome and I'm crushing it. And then the next day I'll come back and maybe I failed a ride, failed a flight event or whatever it was. And so I come back with my tail between my legs and I'm like, I'm never going to be a pilot. There's no way they're going to let me graduate. It's a very challenging course. It's tough for a reason, because it's high stakes things that we're doing out there, especially when you are flying in a combat zone and you're making decisions with actual weapons that are a matter of life and death for either yourself and your other, crews or the enemy. But yeah, it seemed like you could ask my wife, and she would probably agree that it was a pretty recurring thing that I would come home and be like, yeah, this is awesome. And the next day just be like, I'm going to fail.
I'm out. Yeah. Right. Do you remember what it took? Like, so when you had those low moments, how did you kind of overcome that? What role did your wife play in that? Or how did those times go? Did you just kind of muscle through, or what did it look like?
My wife, Kate, played a huge role. So I'm very grateful to her for that. We got married before I went to pilot training. So I had her the whole time. She would be, the encourager and, bring me down off the ledge, if you will. And, remind me that just yesterday I had a great flight and everything. So I am capable. I think a big part of it is the class that I had. I think our class got along really well. And actually we just got to see each other at a sort of reunion. So got to talk to some of those guys and swap war stories. But I think the class was very good at kind of supporting each other. And pilot training is kind of designed that way. But then I think that just the pilot training system itself is designed that hopefully it's very rare that you have somebody go all the way through pilot training who has not failed any of their events between the academic tests, the simulator events, or the actual flying events. Very rare that you have somebody who gets all the way through. It does happen where they don't fail, but and in a lot of ways those guys are probably not as well off because they haven't experienced the failure, picking themselves up and then pressing on and learning from their mistakes. But yeah, everybody's, on somebody's bad day, it's somebody else's good day. And so they're able to kind of help keep you balanced and you're helping each other. And the way that the pilot training program is designed is, there's plenty of areas. If you fail even a couple times in a row, then there's a whole program because the goal is to create pilots. So you've got a guy who's struggling and it's designed that now the instructors are going to pay a little bit more special attention on getting them the training that they need to bring them up to the standard. And then if they continue to fail, then they'll fly with the flight commander and then they'll fly with the squadron commander, and the squadron commander can make the decision on, this guy's going to continue training or no, we need to remove him from training for one reason or another. So between all those things, and I was never, even though it felt like it, I don't think I was ever particularly close to failing out. It did feel like it sometimes.
Yeah.
It was, it sucks to fail. I mean, everybody fails. We all know how it is, but it sucks to fail.
Yeah. And what's interesting there is what you just said, right? So that idea, and I agree, right? It sucks to fail. And especially as a high achiever and someone who's, wants to accomplish things and is constantly striving, when you have those setbacks, it sucks to fail. And at the same time, what you said a minute ago was the guys that never fail, it may be harder for them because when they do eventually have that low point, they didn't learn the lessons that failure teaches and how do you come off the bottom, pick yourself up, and then drive on, right? So it's like, and you hear about this in certain special operations selection programs where some of the most elite athletes will ring out and quit because it's the first time in their life that they really felt pushed and struggling and desperate and like, I don't know if I can do it. And they don't know how to react versus the guy that's kind of always been a scrapper and a fighter and a guy that's lost a lot and won some and lost. And they seem to be able to grind through. So it's like the losses teach us more than the wins in some way, right? And yet we all kind of hate the losses, but they really are so important, right?
Yes. And it makes you want to avoid them. And a lot of ways it's motivating, right? Because that's what makes me, sit in my room studying. So I know the knowledge that I need to know. And so that when I get out there and get the hands-on time, I've got the knowledge and I can focus just on warming up the hands and getting the, physical training I need to do in addition to applying the mental aspect of it.
Right.
Yeah. 100%.
Right. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about combat operations, right? So then once you come through your program, you select F-15. That's the jet you wanted.
That was what I wanted. Yeah. I was, again, grace of God.
Yeah.
There was an F-15E available and that was my first choice. And so I was fortunate to receive that. Yeah.
And so that is for those that maybe don't know, that is it's an attack helicopter, or excuse me, not helicopter, attack fighter jet, right? So it's designed to dogfight, or it's designed to strike and bomb.
It can do both. It has the air-to-air mission and it has an air-to-ground mission as well, which is what drew me to it. Is it was very versatile. One of the more versatile fighters that are out there. Actually, I guess, like the F-35 was designed for multi-role as well, air-to-air and air-to-ground. But yeah, I wanted to be relevant to basically any type of fight that we possibly could be in, whether it's primarily an air-to-ground fight, kind of like what OIR has been, Operation Inherent Resolve has been there in the Middle East, or something different. So, and it's a fantastic airplane.
Yeah. Yep. And it's not, so right now, it's not scheduled to be replaced yet, is it? I mean, it's still currently kind of on the plan, or is it going to be replaced by F-35, or how does that?
It is still a big part of the current plan. The jets are aging, but the Air Force is in the process of actually buying more F-15s, the F-15EX, so kind of just the slightly upgraded version. But the big thing being that it's new, and so it's not. I mean, a lot of the jets that we fly are 30 plus years old, and so as you know, with an old car, there's just maintenance issues, and they get harder and harder to fix and more expensive to fix. And while these jets have been maintained very well over the last couple decades, they're still old, and they're just wear and tear keeps breaking them down. So eventually they will be replaced either by F-35 units, which they're still building F-35, or the new F-15EXs. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, all right. So combat operations. So now you've learned how to fly. You've done all this practice, and now you're kind of taking all the skills you've got into a hostile and real world. It's all real world, but an environment where people are intentionally trying to have you not do the thing that you're training to do, that you've trained to do, right? Just to be successful and be in the air and do all that stuff. What was that like when you dropped into that combat theater?
A lot of it is just relying on training. And that's another thing that the militaries in general, specifically the U.S. military and definitely the aviation side of it, is that you have so much training that you're getting so many reps. Back to the baseball example, it's kind of like you're playing a lot of batting practice, and you're as the catcher, I'm practicing throwing down to second base all the time, so that when I'm in the game and the stakes are a lot higher, and I see that guy running from first to second, or I see that pitch coming in, I just fall back on my mechanics, and as long as I'm not overthinking it, most likely I'll be able to perform. And it was very much the same thing. After pilot training, I went to basic school for the F-15, which was 9 months long, 9 months of just learning how to employ the F-15 at a basic level. And then I get to my first operational assignment, and it's another 3 months of training before I am mission qualified. So up to that point, I'm still not kind of blessed to go operate this thing in combat. Yep. And then after I'm mission qualified, now I'm just a basic wingman. And so I cannot lead any flights. I can fly around by myself, but we never employ as a single ship. Yep. Was what we called. We always employ in at least a 2-ship, if not a 4-ship. And so I flew around as a wingman for about a year. Again, just gathering up training, and I was a part of upgrades for guys who were going through their flight lead upgrades or their instructor upgrades, and got to see how they were learning. And then after about that first year or so, I started my 2-ship flight lead upgrade, where and that was a 3-month process of training through a syllabus where, with instructors who were grading me, and I was failing flights again there and having to refly them until I was performing and briefing well enough that I could be that I could safely employ with a 2-ship. Then I became 2-ship qualified, and then another 3 months of 4-ship flight lead qualification, and then another like 3 to 6 months of becoming an instructor. And that's the point where I deployed when I did go to combat. So by then I'd had so many reps of training that, most situations that came up, while there's always something different, a lot of it falls into some sort of, training that we had prepared for before. And it was less a matter of, oh no, what am I going to do? I got to, figure this out. And more of a, okay, I'm going to rely on my training. And then once the training was insufficient or this specific situation is driving the need to change something, then I will go from there and change something to affect whatever outcome we're trying to affect there. And so in a lot of ways, I mean, employing my first weapons in combat or coming up onto a situation where it's kind of like, whoa, I haven't ever seen this before. You just take a breath and you rely on the training. And if you need to, you ask number 2 what their thoughts are so that you can kind of gather in information there, and then you make a decision and you go for it. And then as that's happening, you just keep the feedback loop open of, all right, what we're trying to do isn't quite working. So how should we change that? Okay. I think we should change it to this based on the situation and based on our experiences in training. Okay, let's do that. And then if that's working, great, continue. And if it's not, then keep reevaluating as we're going along. So a lot of it was, and I mean, a lot of times things are happening so fast, just like in a baseball game, things are happening so fast, you don't really have time to sit and analyze the situation and, go back to the coach and be like, hey, what should we do? You just have to make a decision. You just have to go for it and rely on the fundamentals and the training that you had.
Right on. And so I know in the military, I know at least I've heard, fighter pilots, whether the Air Force or any of the service branches, you guys debrief everything, right? Yeah. So we come back once the mission's over and you analyze, what do we do right? What could we have done better? Right. All of it, just debrief it all and attempt to just learn and get better and learn and get better. And was that kind of your experience? I mean, that's part of it. And maybe how do you bridge that to kind of I know, either a business or civilian life, right? That whole notion of debriefing and activity. Cause you're right. The idea of not overanalyzing, make some assessments, use some data, gather data, then go make a decision. But then the importance of the debrief and the breaking it down. Talk a little bit about that maybe.
Yes. The debrief is absolutely important. And I believe that is what makes those teams or militaries that are the best are the ones who are debriefing. A regular flight out in an operational fighter squadron is you have a period of mission planning that usually is the flight lead or instructor who's doing a lot of that mission planning, and that can take anywhere from 2 hours to potentially 10 hours depending on whatever the mission is. Then there's a brief period where whoever's leading the formation will brief everybody who's flying in the overall fight, in the overall training fight, or the flight of F-15s. So anywhere from 2 to 4, and the briefs usually go for anywhere from an hour to up to 2 hours, depending on the size of the exercise or training flight. And then you go and employ, and your flights are usually only about an hour and a half in the fighter world. And so you fight and you come back and you land. And then first you debrief the jet for maintenance. You tell maintenance that, hey, it's a good jet, or nope, there's an issue with this system and this is what I saw. And then give them the opportunity to diagnose it and fix it. And then you go back and you do your flight debrief. You start with a data gathering period where you're gathering the facts, just what happened. And then once you have all the facts, then you get into it and you start peeling back the onion. Okay, so this went wrong, or we weren't able to hit our target on time. We either missed the target or we didn't hit it on time, or something happened. And then you start asking questions. Okay, so we did not successfully bomb the target. Why is it? Is it a problem with the mission planning? Is it a problem with the brief, with the plan? Is it a problem with the execution somewhere? And you kind of figure out, all right, yeah, maybe it was a mission planning error because we weren't expecting this threat to be there. And once this threat happened, then we had to address that threat and then no longer had time to focus on the target or whatever it was. And you just keep asking questions until you come up with what you think is the root cause as to why you were unsuccessful. Or even if you were successful, you come up with a a couple learning points as to what could have gone better. And to your point, the focus is on learning so that me and my fellow flight mates, whenever we find ourselves in a similar situation, we have one more iteration of learning that's completed, one more opportunity to, whenever we're in combat and it's game time, oh, I remember from that training sortie, this happened. So we need to make sure to be prepared for this, or here's a technique for how we can overcome this challenge or whatever it is. But yeah, keeping that feedback loop open is definitely key. And then not only just keeping it to yourself, but sharing it with all of your squadron and being like, hey, this is what I messed up. And we'll do that. Well, actually, if there was one story where I blew a tire on landing, and it was a scenario that wasn't necessarily preventable. Well, if I'd employed it a little bit differently, I potentially could have prevented blowing the tire on landing. But I learned a lot through that scenario, and after the fact, trying to figure out why that happened and what I could have gone better. I had a better understanding of the aircraft systems, and so I stood up in front of the entire squadron and briefed them on, hey, this is what happened. This is what I could have done better to maybe make the situation better and possibly not, have blown the tire on landing. And these were the lessons that I learned, so that now the entire squadron has that learning. So if any of them find themselves in a similar situation, hopefully they can help mitigate the outcome as a little bit better than what happened to me. And it's very much a focus on, okay, yeah, let's all learn this together so that we can all become better, as opposed to, hey, I'm trying to be the best, pilot in the squadron, so I'm going to keep any of my good skills that I've learned to myself. Is because ultimately, if that's the case, and again, it's the same in sports and it's the same in business, if you're keeping all the secrets, then you're just setting yourself up for failure and everybody else for failure, and you're not moving the team, the company, the military, whatever it is, the squadron forward.
Pardon the interruption, everyone. Do you ever feel like you're out of alignment with your true gifts, your passion, and your purpose for being on this earth? Do you feel like you're grinding it out each week with the appearance of success and still asking, is this it? If so, I get it. I've been right where you're at. And once I figured it out for myself, it's why I started coaching. Now I help my clients get back into alignment with their authentic self. I help them find meaning, purpose, joy, and energy in each day. Check out my website at ericsardina.com to learn more and to schedule a free 15-minute strategy session. And now, back to the show. And that what you said there is so spot on around, it seems from my perspective, having spent a lot of time in the corporate world, that it's often people often treat information or knowledge as power. And so they want to hold it because they feel like it makes them stronger, makes them more valuable. If I have this knowledge that I've gained, I'm going to keep it locked down and I really don't want to share it, versus a mindset that says, I'm going to share all this stuff out and I'm going to give it all away, because ultimately it helps the organization, the group, the division, whatever it is. And those good things eventually, whether they come back to me or not, it's the right thing to do for the group. And it really shows leadership, and it builds people that will, I think, follow, that will understand, like, this is someone to be trusted, someone that's a leader. It's not someone that's looking to just try to retain or empower themselves by holding information, right? But I've seen it a lot where it seems like, unfortunately, it's more rare, I think, to have that mindset of, man, I'm giving it all away. I'm going to share it. I'm going to share the good, the bad, and the ugly, because it's going to make us better. We learned some painful lessons here. Let's share that out. It's, man, I'm going to retain it if it was embarrassing. And if it's really powerful knowledge that's helpful, I'm going to retain it because it makes me stronger. If others don't have this and only I do. And it's a short-sighted approach.
It is. And even just, the exercise of me standing up in front of the squadron and explaining what happened and how to learn required me to learn the scenario at a much deeper level. So I had much more of an understanding of the systems of the jet and the scenario and what drove the outcome that happened than I would have if I'd have just internalized it and not told anybody and not instructed, really. Because as the saying goes, when one teaches, two learn,
right?
And that's 100% true. So you are creating value just going through that kind of feedback, debrief, teaching process.
Sure enough. Right on. What happens when you get a flat tire in a jet? Do you need like fix a flat? I mean, what goes on that you need when you get a flat on landing?
So in this case, I blew the tire. So the tire was completely shredded and it was, down on its just
on
rim.
The metal rim. Okay.
And so they have these hydraulic jacks that come in, and it's got essentially, I don't know if you're on YouTube or just listening to this, but it essentially has these two kind of clencher arms that grab the rim of the wheel and will lift it up off the ground. And then that hydraulic jack has wheels so that you can then tow the aircraft off the runway in this case to wherever maintenance can then put it up on aircraft jacks and then just change out the tire. And then whenever there's a blown tire, you have to make sure that the landing gear is not damaged. And so they jacked up the entire airplane and did a couple of landing gear swing checks to make sure that all of the linkages and mechanically the landing gear itself was not damaged, which in this case it was not. It was simply just they had to replace the rim of the wheel because that was in contact with the runway. But overall, as far as landing emergencies could have gone, it was fairly minor, which is good.
Gotcha. All right, let's talk a bit about attention and focus. So when you're in a fighter cockpit, right, I would imagine there's millions of systems and stuff, and your brain's going in a million different directions, and there's a drag on, you've got attention or the call for attention in all these different ways, and yet how do you focus on the task at hand and accomplishing a broader mission when you've got all these demands? I know that's a lot of what you're working on and bringing kind of more to a civilian mindset is this idea of attention attacks and how do we, protect our attention and focus on the right thing. So speak a little bit about attention.
Absolutely. Here's another case specifically for flying airplanes where a lot of that is baked into the training, where the mantra for flying an airplane is aviate, navigate, communicate. And that kind of helps cage the pilot's attention on what is important first and then what's important next. So whenever anything happens, for example, when on the blown tire situation, I touched down and it wasn't indicated in the air, but then after touchdown, for whatever reason, that was when the hydraulic system failed, which is what drove me not having any brakes. And so the first thing I needed to do was aviate, which in this specific scenario was make sure that I am safely maneuvering the airplane to stay on the runway and not, run off the actual runway and potentially get into a scenario where I'm going to flip the airplane, and that would be really bad. So aviate, fly a safe jet, then navigate. In the case of that EP, I was already on the ground, so I was in the location that I should have been. But in the case of being in the air, navigate is, okay, where do I want to be going? Where do I need to be pointing my jet, whether it's back to base or whether it's towards the enemy or whatever it is. And then communicate after that. Once you've taken care of flying a safe airplane and once you've taken care of putting your airplane in the position that you want it to be, then you get on the radio and you talk about, if you need to, about whatever's going on and communicate your situation or communicate the next tactic that we should be selecting. And that applies, that kind of mantra applies really to anything. Aviate, navigate, communicate. When you're at home and you have a situation come up, you aviate, okay, what do I need to be doing with myself or the family right now? Navigate, all right, yeah, where do we want to be going? What's the direction that we need to be going? And then communicate, start talking. But that will focus your attention on where it needs to be in the order that it needs to be. And it's coming up with a kind of structure like that in whatever the situation is, whether it's business or whether it's, take this interview, for example. What do I need to be doing here? All right, aviate is listening to your questions and just taking in the current situation. Navigate is, all right, which direction do I want to take this? And then communicate is communicate. So, and that if I'm not listening to your questions, then I have no idea what I should be saying. And I'm just going to, go off and say, or if I'm talking first, then that's also not useful. So that is a mantra that we use in aviation anyway, to page our attention to where we need it.
Right on. I love that. And I have to think too. So in a jet cockpit, you've got all these systems and lights and stuff and data coming at you. And are you just kind of going through like a priority? So as you're aviating, there's certain systems that are demanding more attention than others. So you're also kind of stack ranking the importance of these things within the aviation realm, and then stack ranking and moving through a progression in the navigation realm, and then et cetera. You just sort of keep kind of peeling it back within each of those bigger spheres.
Yeah, more or less. This is another scenario where the designers of the jet did a great job of just ergonomically situating the jets so that your attention is going to be cued in to what it probably should be. There's a master caution light that anytime there's a major systems issue, the master caution light will come on, and it's right at the very top of the dashboard. So pretty much wherever you're looking, whether it's inside the cockpit or outside the cockpit, you'll see that light has come on. And a lot of times, depending on the severity, there's an associated audible caution.
Yeah.
Whether it's a tone or a voice saying something specific, like engine fire, or something like that. That will obviously, if you start hearing engine fire, that's going to immediately cue you in to look at the engine stack where it shows you all of the different metrics. It's kind of like essentially the dashboard of the car, the tachometer, where it's showing you the details of what's going on with the engine. And then from there, you start gathering in your data. But again, all right, aviate, navigate, communicate. If I just get completely globbed onto looking at my engine stack and just staring at it, then what's going to happen with the jet? Who knows? I'm probably going to start, falling. If I was on autopilot, that's one thing, and that's a thing that all I have to do is click on autopilot, and then the jet will keep me flying level, and now I can divert more of my attention to, in this case, the engine that I'm trying to diagnose and figure out what the problem is, and figure out what the initial action is, whether it's to pull it back to idle and see if that fixes the problem, or maybe I need to turn it all the way off, or do any of the other procedures. So the jet is kind of designed that way, but I think that's the key is if I get a cue, whether it's an issue with the jet or whether it's a threat pops up that's potentially a danger to me or any of my flight, if I just glob onto that and completely focus on that, then that'll be at the expense of probably something else that's very important, if not at this exact moment, even more important. For example, if I'm in charge of deconflicting from the other airplane and I'm just completely looking at the engine or looking at the threat and I hit my wingman, well, now it's far worse for both me and my wingman than if I'd have, continued straight, taken my attention momentarily off of the threat or the engine and looked at the other airplane to make sure that we didn't hit each other. That's, an example. But yeah, just a constant evaluation of where should my attention be. And this is applicable to anything, whether it's business. For example, if you're running a meeting, what's the point of the meeting? If we start going down a rabbit hole and continuing to go down that rabbit hole, then an hour passes and we haven't actually addressed whatever the whole entire purpose of this meeting was. Maybe it's at home and you've got your young kids who are, going to bed in an hour or something like that. And you're just sitting there on your phone or you're just, watching the TV show, and at the expense of building a relationship with your kids or your wife or whatever it is, the scenario of just, being aware of your surroundings, but then being intentional about putting your attention where it needs to be is key. And during this period of time where cell phones and social media and the makers of entertainment TV shows have been investing millions and billions of dollars into how to grab our attention and keep it locked into whatever it is, the feed. We are up against a big battle, and it takes not just realizing that it's a thing, but it takes building up the systems, just like the systems in the jet are specifically designed to kind of put your attention where it needs to be when it needs to be there, putting systems in place in your environment at work and at home to make sure that it's easier to put your attention where it needs to be than just get sucked into whatever it is. And that's, whatever it is can be the small rocks of like, oh yeah, I need to go, work on this little project here, when the project that really matters is getting ignored because it's hard and it's difficult to put your attention there. Setting up the environment to make sure that you're putting your attention where it needs to be, I think, is key, and it's more important now than ever before.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I love this area of discussion. So, because There is what you said there. It's not just that social media is cool and it's, I follow the things I want to follow. It's like the tool is actually working to figure out what it is that I like to follow, and it's pumping more and more of that stuff toward me. And then it even kind of goes, well, you might not have truly indicated you like to follow this or that, but you think based on your age, your demographics, some other things, and some other stuff that you follow, you might like this other stuff. So it's working to gain your attention, right? And like you said, it wants your attention for as long as possible. So it's not even that you've taken a minute to look at something. It's like, no, we want to figure out how do we keep him in with this sort of casino algorithm of keeping them at the table, keeping them at the machine for as long as possible. Because we know ultimately it's a big consumer product device, right? It's designed to sell you stuff, to get you to buy stuff. What's the saying? It's like if you can't find the product, it's because you're the product, I think, or something like that, right?
Yep.
And so
the product. There's companies making big money on selling our attention to the highest bidder,
right,
in the form of primarily advertisements.
Yes. And so how do you protect? Do you have any tools or strategies that you use to sort of combat that or address that yourself, and keeping your attention focused on what is important and what is your mission?
Absolutely, and a big part of it is setting up the environment, which means putting into place multiple things that will, in whatever scenario you're in, will keep your attention on where it needs to be. Some tactical level things that I do is my cell phone. Number one, I have very few social media apps on it, and they're only the ones that I either need to use for work purposes or have a specific point of value that I gain from them. But big picture, there's only one thing that makes my phone vibrate or make a sound, and that's a phone call. Everything else, like for a text message or any type of message or an email or anything, my phone does not physically notify me, either orally or aurally or with visually, the vibration. Some of the messaging apps will put a banner push notification, but silent, so it's just silently up there. Most don't even do that. For example, email, I do not let my email on my phone notify me that I have a new email. The assumption is I probably have a new email, let's be honest. Right. And I have to actually go into the app specifically to check if there's an email, which means that I'm not being distracted. Every time I get a new email, my phone is not saying, hey, you should check me.
Yeah.
So that is one less time every single day that I'm not checking my phone. And as we all know, once you open the phone, you've got a million other notifications, or you see the app there and you open it up, and all of a sudden 20 minutes later, you're still scrolling on Instagram or whatever it is.
Yep.
So in order to set up my environment to prevent that, I only let a select few apps push a notification to the top bar, and none of them, except for a phone call, actually physically notify me that it's happening. And during certain times of the day, I don't even let the phone call notify me unless it's 2 calls in a row or whatever. And every phone, doesn't matter if it's Android or Apple, they've all got capabilities to do that. Secondly, another big one is at work. At work I can't bring my phone with me to my desk because my desk is in a secured area where we aren't allowed to have cell phones. But the byproduct of that is I'm not sitting at my desk with a cell phone. So I cannot be distracted by I absolutely cannot be distracted by my cell phone when I'm sitting at my desk at work, which means that's one major area where I'm not kind of splitting up my attention. I can place my attention solely on whatever's in front of me. Same thing. And again, this is part of due to the nature of flying, but we don't fly around with our cell phones out. And so there's not a distraction. When we're out there flying, we are focused on the task at hand, which is flying. And not to say that there's not distractions and there's not periods of time where, the other day I took off and flew all the way down to, I'm in Las Vegas area. I flew all the way down to New Mexico. And so it was, 50 minutes of just driving along. So there's plenty of things to distract me, just looking out the window at the scenery below or whatever. But then when I'm locked in and I'm in the actual scenario, whatever it is, I'm completely focused and the distractions are away. So a lot of it is just setting up. There's plenty of people who put out the sign on their door that say, hey, I'm doing deep work right now. So you are not, unless it's an absolute emergency, you are not allowed to disturb me. And it takes time to set up that environment because it takes time for people to realize A, why you're doing that, and B, to respect that. And but it is important. Things like scheduling time on your calendar for a meeting with yourself to do specific work. And that's important because now you're not just investing your money, you're investing your time into what matters, either for yourself personally or for your work and your organization. Those are probably the couple big ones that I would say, but that is the key, and it's not easy to do, and it's taken me a long time to get to the place where I am, and everybody can get there. We all have the ability to stiff arm a lot of the distractions that we have these days, but it does take time, and it takes intentionality, and it takes a desire to do it.
Yeah. I love that. And having barriers and boundaries around where the phone is and when you interact with it is such a huge thing. Physical boundaries, not looking at it first thing in the morning, not looking at it right before you go to bed. All those things I think are super important. And just creating that space. I love the idea of not having apps on there. That would require tremendous discipline. I think a commitment, obviously, to say I'm going to do that. I've thought about doing it. I haven't done it yet. This idea that, because I interact with Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn most often for work stuff. But the reality is I could do that when I'm at my computer, and I could leave it off my phone. But I've kind of told myself, no, I kind of need it there for work. But the reality is it's such a vortex of time, that's just waiting to suck you in, where you've lost an hour and you haven't even realized it, getting pulled into things. But yeah, boundaries are a huge thing. The do not disturb for me has been a really important, tool to get comfortable having that on for long periods of time during the day, and the time blocking. I love all that.
I will say, if I can interject, this is a place where when you get rid of the notifications, you won't even notice it. And B, kind of like what you just said, the little justification that, for work purposes, it's good to have it on my phone. And yes, you're right. There are benefits that you can get out of it, but it comes at a cost.
Right. There's a cost.
The whole kind of, what do you call it?
It's like a value equation.
Oh yeah, this is good, but in reality, it is good a little bit, but it's also would potentially be a lot better if you sacrifice that little bit of good for the greater good.
Right on. What do you think about artificial intelligence? Do you have thoughts there in terms of, now it's, we've talked about how the cell phones and things, your mobile device, whatever, is sending you things. It's learning what you like to look at, or what you're certainly pausing and looking at, and it's sending you more of that stuff. And then this idea that machines are now learning, whatever that means, and able to write letters, write stories, create images, appear like people, sound like people, all sorts of, artificial intelligence to me is so, for me, honestly, a very scary thing when I think about what it's kind of doing and how quickly it's moving. But I'm curious if you've got thoughts there, and especially as maybe it relates to, flying an aircraft, or, the world that you've been living in now for quite a number of years around, the military and aviation and all that. And you think about, how does artificial intelligence maybe factor into some of those things, as well as, family and business and things like that. Do you have any thoughts there?
I do. There's a couple things. First, it's a great tool if we're using it correctly. And I think it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. It's changing very fast, and that's true. And that's even more reason that we need to be learning and understanding its capabilities and its drawbacks, and so we can adjust from there. I think the biggest thing, they're talking about AGI, the artificial general intelligence, and the breakthroughs are that it can successfully do simple math like 2 + 2 correctly. The ChatGPT 4 and everything that's out right now is not cognitive. Everything that you're seeing, every output that it's putting out is a derivative of something that it's already been fed.
Right.
So it is not, AI right now is not strategic. It cannot be. So that is a place where humans have a distinct and at this point unlimited advantage over AI. If you don't have the grand strategy of where you want to go when you're interacting with AI, it's going to give you trash. But if you know where you're wanting to go and you know how to have it help you get you there, it can be very beneficial and be a massive time saver. But it's not going to. You can't just be like, hey, come up with the best strategy for addressing this. It'll regurgitate strategies that have been posted online previously for maybe kind of similar situations. But everybody's got access to that same stuff now. It's the thing that's going to set you apart is you assessing the situation, putting the attention to strategically chewing on whatever problem it is that you're trying to solve, and then coming up with a way that's relevant to today and not relevant to yesterday or 2000 or 2021 or whatever it is. Yep. So, and with artificial general intelligence, it's tough to see exactly where that's going to go. As far as kind of, will it have the ability to kind of bring a little bit more strategic level things? And in some ways that's scary. In some ways it's really exciting. But ultimately, I think either way, with the advent of AI, just like with the advent of computers, it now requires us to specifically focus on what humans are able to do that these systems are not, which there's still plenty. I mean, for example, in the information age, when computers came out, they helped with the creation, storage, curation, and sale of information. And now we've become really good at that. And now instead of humans having to hand write down things that we wanted to remember, all that became easier. And so, it took away jobs from the hand writers, but it opened up a ton of value because now we're able to do so much more and we're able to fulfill a lot more potential. And it's the same thing today. Instead of humans doing some of the more basic work, it's going to free those humans up to do things that humans that humans alone are able to do that AI can't do. And so it's just going to move everything along. So I think that's a good way to look at it. And I believe we're in the attention age. I believe the information age is gone and we've crossed into a new age, and it's the attention age. And that's because our attention is being bought and sold. And so that's where the value is. Just like before, it was the creation, buying, and selling of information. It's now the in a way, creation, buying, and selling of human attention that is valuable. And that's the reason that Google and Meta and all those companies are as big as they are, because they're buying and selling our attention. And as we get into artificial intelligence, that's just going to tighten that value, because again, now that AI has diminished the value of being able to curate a lot of information and bring out of it exactly what you want it to bring out, that is going to narrow and just absolutely outsize the value of actual human attention. Because why do I need you if I can just type it into ChatGPT and get an answer that you would have been able to provide me 5 years ago that I wouldn't have been able to find, that you would have been the best way to get that information. So, I mean, what I'm saying here is our attention is important, and if we are following the herd and allowing the social media apps and all the other distractors to just suck us in and keep us there, then we are not in a good place. You're specifically not in a good place. But if you're being intentional about where you're putting your attention, and that involves being strategic and thinking about all right, this year in 2024, where do I need to be putting my attention? What matters to me? My faith, my family, my job, whatever it is. How am I going to do that now? What are the, like you said, boundaries that I'm going to put in place, and the systems that I'm going to put in place, whether it's notifications on your phone or whatever it is, to aid me in placing my attention where it matters that my attention should be.
Right on. Yep. I love it. And it's helpful to me as I tend to, you just presented a very hopeful and very sort of positive viewpoint on AI, which is great, because I again tend to think of it and then kind of go, man, this thing it's scaring me to death. I think we're in the early stages of the movie, The Terminator 1, and so, or we're seeing what caused all those big piles of rubble and all the other machines to be flying around. And so, but I like the way you position that. And I get that, right? Because if you look at humankind, there at one point there were people that made buggy whips, and eventually the buggies went away. So the guy making the buggy whip was no longer needed, but he had skills and he's a talented craftsman. He's probably crafting things on an automobile, and then
I was making car tires.
Now he's making car tires or whatever it is. And so, yes, we get to evolve to higher levels of the things that we are good at and capable of as human beings when lesser things are taken over or are absorbed by machines or leverage or pulleys or whatever it might be. That's more of a, doesn't require human intervention. And so I like that. I like that view, and I'm going to work on adopting that because I think it's very positive.
It is happening a lot faster now than it was, thinking about the agriculture age to the industrial age, that transition took a long time. And then the industrial age to the information age took a long time compared to how long it took us to get from the information age to here where we are now.
Yeah.
So that is, I mean, instead of an age happening in a generation or greater, it's now happening within generations.
Yes. Agreed. One of the things that I want to touch on too, and I know we're getting a little bit longer, but hopefully if you've still got some more time, Wes, we'll keep rolling. So one of the interesting things to me about the fighter pilot thing and the space you're in is it requires certainly a massive amount of intelligence and the ability to process information and deal with kind of the psychology of what's happening, as well as the physical, right? So it's your body's being kind of pushed and pulled through a massive amount of physical stress and strain, dopamine releases, all sorts of things where once that hour and a half flight is over, you have to be at some amount of like tired, right? Exhausted, spent, fluids have come out, right? You've sweated. I'm sure it's extremely rigorous. And so how does physical things play into your life, right? How do you, what are your thoughts around, I'm sure, well, I know a bit of your background. You're an endurance athlete. You do some, hard, long events. You've done the rim to rim to rim and some of these other, challenging things. Love to talk about those things. But what are your thoughts around the importance of physical movement in helping to manage your psychology and your other physiology? You hear a lot of talk of these days about anxieties people are expressing anxiety at a very high rate, depression, suicide, very high rate. A lot of, quote unquote, mental health, which is sort of mental, not health, right? We use the term mental health to mean sort of the opposite, is sort of off the chart. What are your thoughts about the importance of physical work and how does it play a part in your life?
So as you mentioned, physical fitness has always been a big part of my life. I'm competitive, like we talked about at the beginning, and an area that I like to compete against myself, as in I like to, come up with new physical challenges to do. I like that for two reasons. A, it's just fun doing it and, having those experiences and seeing the sights and whether it's my wife and I a couple of years ago climbed to the top of Mount Whitney, the highest point in the lower 48. And then, like you mentioned, rim to rim to rim of the Grand Canyon, a huge long hike in one day. I did that with 5 of my fellow squadron mates. And it was probably it was probably the most physically challenging day I've ever had in my life. But doing it with those guys and seeing the sights that we saw and accomplishing it and seeing, wow, my body is capable of doing that, hiking that far and that high and everything. I think that's really good, not just on a physical level, but on a mental resilience level. And it all ties into, like you were talking about the cockpit, where there's physical stressors from high altitude and pulling G's and the physical stressors, and then add on to that the mental stressors of decision making and all that. It's a very physically demanding, not just mentally demanding. It's very mentally demanding, but it's also very physically demanding. And it's a physical thing that we're doing. Is I'm physically controlling the jet with my body, not just with my fingertips or my mind.
Yep.
And the need to be physically fit in a lot of ways, it just eliminates one more kind of obstacle that I need to overcome. Because if I'm physically fit and I can physically handle those G's and my body can recover from it can handle it, and B, it can recover from it quickly, then that's one less thing I have to worry about on a day-to-day basis for being capable employing the aircraft. And that allows me to then focus on whatever learning that I need to do or anything else. And I just bring so much more performance to the employment of the jet from a human perspective. And kind of what you're talking about, the mental health / unhealth, your brain is physically connected to your body, and it's physically powered energy wise by your body. And so and there's also a myriad of cognitive benefits that are tied to strength training and endurance training. And I mean, you could even go farther than that, and cold exposure, all that type of stuff, nutrition. So everything in the human body, and we were created this way, everything is tied together. From what you're putting into your body is going to affect your energy output and your ability to concentrate and pay attention, as well as your physical fitness is going to, the linkage is both ways.
Yep.
I mean, we've all experienced it, and it's just a matter of keeping it front of mind. But you're in a bad mood, all you got to do is physically smile,
yes,
and you will immediately feel
better,
mentally and emotionally better.
Yeah.
And vice versa. When you feel emotionally better because somebody gave you a compliment or whatever it was, then that manifests physically as well via a smile, and it makes you feel physically better as well. Everything is tied together. So if you're eating like trash and you're not exercising, then just by laws of physics, you are going to feel like trash, and you're not going to be able to concentrate as much. So that's a lot of the way that I think of it. And coming to the tactical level of where am I putting my attention, at home, on my family when I need to be paying attention to my family, at work on the big projects as opposed to the more meaningless projects, because everybody has plenty of those things in the workplace that to being in the cockpit or whatever, being in the bottom of the Grand Canyon and knowing that you need to get yourself all the way out of there, or it's going to be a long and potentially very dangerous night. Putting all those together and affecting the outcome that you want, I think is very important. And that is just another discipline, and discipline can be automated if you put the habits in place and create the environment. Then your discipline in staying physically and mentally fit can just become a habit and take no extra energy, because it's just what you do, and you feel better because of it.
Right on. Yep. Do you have a morning routine? Do you have something that you do every morning when you're not maybe, called to some, military activity that's outside your control?
Yeah, I do. Both my wife and I have been in a very good habit, long-term habit over the past couple of years of getting up early. And when I say early, I'm talking 5:30 in the morning, potentially earlier, depending on when I have to go to work. I get up and I work out first thing I drink water and then work out first thing in the morning. And for me, that's important because it gets the blood flowing, it wakes me up. And then walking into work after having a good workout and physically feeling not like jittery because my muscles haven't been worked, but feeling calm, but also capable, and knowing that, yes, I've already put a big check mark of I completed that this morning. And then a good shower so that I feel clean and good and ready to go is so much better of a way to start my day at work or whatever it is than, I barely got up in time and I was rushed and I can hardly think as I'm, having breakfast or not having breakfast because I don't have time, and getting in the car and showing up to work late, and maybe I forgot something because, I didn't have time. And it's a much better way. So I work out for 30 minutes to an hour. And then I spend time in the Word and praying. Yeah. And then after that, usually is about after that, usually I'll have a little bit of time to put some work in either on my business or whatever it is, current house project or whatever. And then after that, usually the girls, my kids will get up and I'll have breakfast with them, and then I'll be off to work and go from there. And that is largely, depending on the scenario of how early I have to wake up or specific scenario, I can adjust that from there, but that is the basic flow. And I think here's another tip, and it originates, at least James Clear talks about it in his book, Atomic Habits, but scale the scope don't skip the workout.
Mm.
So scaling the scope, if I don't have time for a 30-minute workout, even just doing a set of 100 push-ups or 50 push-ups or
Yep.
whatever to get the heart rate pumping is not maybe quite as good of a benefit as a full 30-minute workout, but I'm still getting the heart rate going,
Yep.
which means I'm feeding my brain with blood. I'm upping the oxygen level to my entire body. And just from, sitting down there, laying down there, doing 100 push-ups or, push-ups for a minute or whatever it is,
Yep.
get the body moving is so much better than completely skipping it, period.
Yep.
And that applies to a lot of different things.
Yep, for sure. You mentioned spending time in the Word. Talk about your faith life in terms of like how that maybe has been part of your life and what that looks like for you now. Have you always had a strong faith life? Did you come to it later in life? And what does that look like?
I was raised in a believing family, so went to church growing up and everything, and was saved at a relatively young age. And it was college was good because I was exposed to a lot of different ways of life, and that was a good time where it kind of solidified my faith in a lot of ways. But it's been a journey, as it is with everybody, in the different experiences and where that takes. But I kind of mentioned it before. The priorities of faith, family, fitness, function, and then fun. If the top priority is not in place, then chances are way better than anything else that all of the lower level priorities are also probably not in a great place. So if I'm not putting in the time in my relationship with God by studying scripture and by praying, then probably my family life is suffering a little bit, and definitely my work life is suffering, and my personal fitness, mental and physical, and just taking, self-care is probably suffering a little bit too. And then I'm probably not having fun either. But if I've got my faith dialed as far as I'm, putting in the reps, in some cases it is reps. And if it takes checking it off the list to get you doing it, then that is a first good step. It's not a great excuse to be like, well, I don't have 30 minutes to apply to it, so I'm going to do nothing. Again, going back to the push-up example, just read one verse in the car on the way to work. Have your cell phone read it off to you, because there's plenty of apps that can, just even if it's the proverb of the day, the proverb chapter of the day, do that, because that is far better, and that'll put you in the frame of mind of thinking the things above instead of just the things on earth. The kind of vertical thinking as opposed to the lateral. And then taking the time to pray. And then same thing with the family. If I've got my faith dialed as far as my relationship with God and my family's suffering, then probably my work and everything else is suffering a little bit too. So faith, family, fitness, function, which is work or flying in my case, some way, and then fun. Taking the priority and making sure that I'm putting the attention that I need to be on each of those priorities in that order is kind of how I've seen my life recently, and that's been a big reason that I've been successful where I have been.
Right on, love it. What's next for you, Wes? I know you're still active fighter pilot. How much longer? Kind of what's on the horizon for you? What are you excited about?
That's decisions coming up. I'm going to be still flying for the time being. We'll be out here for another couple of years, and then after that, we'll see where God takes us. Got some opportunities both in the Air Force and out of the Air Force, so we will see where that's going. I also have my my business that I run a mastermind for, and I do coaching in the kind of the area that we've been talking about, of attention performance, and that's not just attention and setting up the environment to be putting your attention. It's also bringing fitness in and making sure that you're putting the time into faith, family, fitness, all those things. So helping people do that is going to stay, whether that's my full-time job after the Air Force or it's something I do on the side in addition to something else. I'm definitely going to continue doing that, because the world right now needs it, and the next generation of leaders who are going to be leading organizations and companies and states and nations. If we've got guys who and people who are not able to put their attention where it needs to and address the obstacles as they come up from a place of strength as opposed to a place of reaction, then we're in bigger trouble than we think we are. So but yeah, that's next. I love what I do. I love flying airplanes and affecting the future of the nation, at least militarily. It's been a great job, and I've been very blessed to be able to do what I've been doing. So I'm enjoying where I'm at. And I've got some young kids, so raising the kids is obviously going to be a huge part of what's next for me as well.
That's awesome. So the coaching, you're coaching one-on-one, or you have a mastermind. Are you also doing one-on-one?
Both, yeah. So I have the mastermind, and then I do one-on-one coaching as well. Again, focused primarily on attention. I call it attention performance, but it is prioritizing where you need to be putting your attention, and it can be specifically at home or at work, or kind of all encompassing.
Yep.
And then helping come up with the systems to create the environment that is going to help you be successful in that.
Right on. Sweet. Where can people find you, man, and connect with your work and reach out to you and all those good things?
Best place is the website, weswoodhouse.com. It's got what I do up there, and then a way to get a hold of me for a 15-minute call, and we can go from there. And I'd love to meet you.
Awesome, man. It's been a fun conversation, Wes. I appreciate you hanging in there for what's almost an hour and a half. It's been a great talk, man. I think we could have gone in a lot of different places, talked about endurance sports and running and all those things. But what a fun talk, and I really appreciate your time and all the things you shared.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me here, Eric. And I want to hear when you do rim to rim to rim, or even if it's just rim to rim to rim. I want to hear about it, because what an experience. It was fantastic.
It's definitely high on my list. And yeah, it's going to happen in the near future for sure. So
I'd love to hear about it.
To our audience, thank you for taking time from your busy day to listen. Always humbled that you do that. If you would share the program with a friend, write a review, give us a rating, all those things help us reach a broader audience. Until next time, friends, I'm Eric Sardina. You've been listening to the Return to Authenticity podcast, and bye for now.